Married off as a sacrificial pawn, Gina Eel fled the cold palace carrying her secret love for Crown Prince Cecil and the secret of the baby in her womb. 5 years later, she returned as a perfume expert, but a twist of fate had their twin children swap identities on their own. On one side was a single mother struggling to raise her child. On the other, a cold prince going mad searching for his ex-wife. Could the scent of the South African orchid help them recognize each other amid so much deception? Let's read the story together. The story begins with Gina Eel's own account. She was born the eldest daughter of the prestigious Eel family, one of the 3 greatest noble powers controlling the entire Toronto Empire. Fate led her to marry Crown Prince Cecil Toronto. Despite his high rank and power, this prince carried the haunting curse of the blood dragon. Everything unfolded exactly as her father had calculated. Gina was pushed into this marriage like nothing more than a sacrificial pawn on her family's political chessboard. Since childhood, Gina had been unable to use magic and was coldly neglected by her family, living quietly in the shadow of her younger sister Eleanor. Her father had once coldly declared that if she didn't obey, her existence would be entirely meaningless. In truth, this marriage had originally been meant for Eleanor, but her spoiled younger sister flatly refused to marry a prince cursed like that, scorning him as unworthy of her. Because their father and brother doted on Eleanor, they forced Gina to go in her place, into the tiger's den. They warned her that even if she climbed to the position of crown princess, she would still be nothing but a shadow, and forced her to spy for the family. They were so heartless that they cut off every possible retreat for her, declaring that no matter what happened, the family's wealth and power would never fall into her hands. The dark mission her family assigned Gina was to support the second prince, the faction backed by the Eel family, in order to find a way to overthrow her own husband, Crown Prince Cecil. Yet no one knew a shocking secret. After years of living like a puppet, her wedding day turned out to be the happiest day of Gina's life because she had secretly loved Cecil for a long time. Cecil appeared in his stately ceremonial robes, his cold, handsome looks drawing every eye in the room. The moment he took her hand at the altar, Gina's heart pounded wildly, emotion surging up that she could not suppress. She was truly happy to become part of his family. Gina told herself she wouldn't dwell on the curse, determined to hide her role as a spy so she could love him wholeheartedly and fulfill her duty as his wife. However, her dream shattered when Cecil coldly drew a clear line on their wedding night. He told her bluntly that this was merely a political marriage, forbidding her from dreaming or expecting anything from him. Crueler still, he handed her a bottle of contraceptive medicine and flatly declared they would divorce in 3 months, so the arrival of a child was completely unnecessary. Heartbroken, Gina still wiped away her tears and accepted it. She told herself that even with only 3 short months by his side, she would give it her all, hoping this feeling might reach his frozen heart. A month passed, and Gina sat lost in thought in the garden, unaware that her gentleness was slowly changing how everyone around her saw her. The servants whispered that the crown princess was nothing like the rumors. They talked about how she had eased the prince's headache and given him a sachet, guessing that the prince had begun to want to keep her by his side. Cecil fingered the sachet his wife had given him, his face flashing with a hint of embarrassment, though he still sternly ordered the servants to stop their idle chatter. Unexpectedly, after an examination, Irina announced that Gina was pregnant. Both of them were stunned, since Gina had clearly been taking the contraceptive medicine as instructed. This forced her to find a way to negotiate before speaking the truth. Please review. She began to imagine a small, happy family of her own, where she, Cecil, and their child would live together, but harsh reality soon shattered that illusion. Cecil flew into a rage and hurled a stack of letters down in front of her, the letters Gina had been forced to write reporting on him to her family. He was furious, believing she had been deceiving him the whole year. Gina panicked, tears welling up as she tried to explain that things weren't what he thought, but her words carried no weight anymore. Cecil coldly accused her of being a spy. He believed she had betrayed him and was now trying to use the baby in her womb to blackmail him without his consent. He leaned close to her face and cruelly declared he would not let the Eel family get what they wanted, demanding she get rid of the child. In despair, Gina cried out her husband's name as she collapsed, realizing he would never trust her again. Her maternal instinct surged. She knew she could not let her child be harmed. To protect the only blood she had left, Gina decided to flee the palace that very night. She hoped that once she left this place behind, she would finally have a real family of her own. She gave birth to a pair of adorable twins, but before the joy could even settle, Cecil's pursuing soldiers had already picked up her trail and were closing in nearby. Guards searched every inn in the city, shouting loudly and demanding doors be opened as they hunted the criminal on Crown Prince Cecil's orders. In a moment of life-or-death urgency, Gina had no choice but to leave one baby with an old woman at the inn, handing over all her precious belongings as collateral, then fled with the other child to draw the pursuers away. But tragedy struck when she returned for her child. The old woman trembled and apologized, telling her that both the baby and the token she'd left behind had been stolen by thieves. Devastated beyond words, Gina still had to clutch her remaining child and run into the snow-white night. She began a long stretch of days both fleeing pursuit and desperately searching for her lost child, with no clue where to look. In the blink of an eye, 5 years passed. Gina had shed her identity as the Eel family's puppet and become a talented perfume expert and a resilient single mother. Her daughter Odell, sharp as ever, noticed her mother lost in thought about her missing older brother and innocently asked if she was missing him. Gina held Odell close, smiling to reassure her daughter, and herself, that they would surely find the missing child one day. And yet, not even in her dreams could Gina have imagined the ironic twist of fate awaiting mother and daughter. The tides of life led her hand in hand with her daughter, right back to the very place she had once fled, the palace of Crown Prince Cecil Taranto. The steward confirmed that Gina was indeed the perfume expert invited for the day, her manner somewhat stern and probing. She instructed the mother and daughter to follow her, reminding them pointedly that this was the prince's residence and they were not permitted to wander about. Seeing Odell looking frightened and gripping her hand tightly, Gina crouched down to gently reassure her daughter not to worry. She politely thanked the steward for the reminder, thinking to herself that Cecil was still the same as ever, always craving absolute quiet. She told her daughter to wait in the hall, carefully warning her not to run around and disturb the horror magic that had been set in place. The reason she was so anxious was that Odell's eye color and hair were identical to Cecil's. Without the horror magic concealing them, her daughter's true identity would be exposed instantly. For years, Gina had lived in hiding, using magic to alter her daughter's appearance and making a living crafting sachets. She had risked coming here today, knowing Cecil was away, to search for any clue about her missing child. Once alone in the waiting room, Gina finally allowed herself to breathe out in relief, letting her guard down. Her eyes clouded with sorrow as she unconsciously whispered Cecil's name, old memories flooding back into her mind. Over the past 10 years, the neighboring empire had repeatedly launched attacks, but it was Cecil's own magical power that had driven back the fire dragons, protecting the nation's peace. His reputation now was formidable, and no one dared look down on him. Just then, a servant's panicked scream rang out, announcing that the young master had vanished, throwing the whole estate into chaos. Catching wind that Cecil was about to return, Gina flinched, startled, her fear of being discovered rising again. She asked a servant what the commotion outside was about. The maid snapped that the mother and daughter should mind their own business and hurry along once their task was done out of sight. Meanwhile, a pet bird named Anne suddenly flew over to chat with Odell, asking her when her mother would be back. Delighted, Odell chased after the playful little bird as it flew off down the hallway, drifting out of her mother's sight. In a sun-drenched garden, a finely dressed little boy named Theodore Taranto stood alone, lost in thought. The boy sighed wearily, telling himself that even though he'd managed to sneak this far, the adults would probably catch him again soon. Theodore, looking sad, his eyes welling up, wondered why he was kept locked away at home, never allowed to step out into the world beyond. Suddenly, quite literally, someone fell from the sky. Odell tumbled off a balcony right onto the spot where Theodore stood, making him jump in shock. The hard impact left Odell aching all over, and in her panic, she suddenly remembered her mother's warning never to let the horror magic on her be disturbed. But it was already too late. The disguising magic dissolved, and Odell's true hair and eye color slowly emerged in the sunlight. Theodore stared, wide-eyed with astonishment, watching the girl in front of him transform, unable to understand what was happening. The two children stared at each other in stunned silence, astonished to see that they looked exactly alike, like 2 drops of water. It felt just like looking in a mirror. From their faces to their eyes, everything matched perfectly, without a single difference, Odell fumbled nervously, worried her mother would scold her for breaking the magic. Seeing this, Theodore put on a grown-up air and tried to calm his new little friend. After talking, Odell realized that Theodore had been forbidden by his father from going outside due to his frail health. The clever little Odell came up with a bold idea, swapping identities with each other. After all, the two of them looked exactly alike anyway. Odell suggested trading places for 3 days so he could finally get the chance to go outside and play to his heart's content, escaping these 4 suffocating walls. Odell confirmed the plan once more, and Theodore asked her again if she was really sure. The boy cheerfully introduced himself as Theodore Toronto, and the girl happily gave her name as Odell in return. Odell laughed, her eyes crinkling with excitement, clearly thrilled by this fascinating game of disguise. She even generously lent Theodore her pet bird Anne to keep him company. The 2 clever children agreed to use the bird Anne to pass letters and keep in secret contact with each other during the swap. Odell giggled in her disguise as a boy, while Theodore looked at his new friend with gratitude for helping make his dream come true. Little Theodore offered Odell his heartfelt thanks before the 2 of them set off on their adventure. Meanwhile, Gina was frantically searching for her daughter, her heart burning with worry at not seeing Odell anywhere. She anxiously clutched the curtain, since Odell was such a well-behaved child who had never once wandered off on her own like this before. Gina rushed around, searching everywhere, her instincts warning her that something was terribly wrong. Thinking of Cecil about to return, she deeply regretted her reckless decision to come back into the tiger's lair. Fear engulfed Gina. If Odell were discovered, she would lose everything, and she could not bear to endure any more loss. Gina froze in place when she spotted a small figure huddled in a corner, wrapped tightly in a hooded cloak. She called softly for Odell and saw the child, actually Theodore in disguise as Odell, looking at her timidly. Overcome with emotion, Gina rushed forward and threw her arms around the child, sighing with relief, believing she had found her beloved daughter. Wrapped in the warm embrace of the birth mother he had never known, Theodore's face flushed red, his heart pounding, and he hesitantly murmured the word, "Mom." Noticing her child seemed a bit strange, Gina quickly apologized, assuming the disguising magic on Odell had simply worn off, revealing her true appearance. She gently reassured the child that it was all right, that as long as they stayed close, she could reapply the concealment magic right away. Theodore asked again, surprised, just to be sure. Gina kissed the child's forehead gently, declaring that he was her priceless treasure, and urged him to hurry home with her. Theodore obediently complied, feeling for the first time the sacred bond of a mother's love. In the great hall of the palace, the tension was unbearable. Cecil raged furiously that Theodore had been missing so long, yet the servants still had no leads. The servants trembled as they tried to urge the prince to calm his anger and take care of his health. They reported that no strangers had visited the estate that day, except for a female perfume expert who had come by appointment. Cecil's suspicion instantly fell on that mysterious woman. He ordered her seized at once so he could personally interrogate her. The servants scrambled off to carry out the order, while Cecil stood there, his expression thick with a frightening killing intent. Suddenly, Cecil's body stiffened as a violent wave of pain struck him, leaving him dizzy. The agony from the vicious curse grew steadily worse, tormenting his body until he staggered, clutching his face, and the servants rushed to catch him. A quick-witted servant offered up a freshly made sachet, asking if its scent might help ease his pain even a little. Cecil gripped the sachet tightly, pressing for word of the Purification Master's whereabouts, but was met only with a helpless shake of the head. Legend held that the Purification Master appeared only once every 100 years, possessing the power to heal any magical affliction. Cecil desperately needed this person to cure the illness caused by his overuse of magic. Despite mobilizing every resource to search for 4 years since rumors of the Master's appearance first surfaced, it had all been like searching for a needle in a haystack. In his despair, he asked once more about Gina's whereabouts, but was met again with that terrifying silence. His wife remained utterly without a trace. Cecil buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed with grief and helplessness, wondering just how much longer Gina intended to keep running from him. He recalled the past. Though he had turned the entire country upside down searching for her, all he had ever recovered were a few tokens, and the boy, Theodore. Too many things didn't add up, and he began to wonder whether this whole tragedy had stemmed from his own misunderstanding. The impatient guards relayed the order to hunt down that woman as quickly as possible, on no account letting her escape. Before Gina and her daughter could leave, soldiers blocked their path, declaring that neither of them was permitted to step 1 foot outside this area. The head housekeeper appeared, her face thick with menace, falsely accusing Gina of stealing valuables from the estate and fleeing in haste because of it. Though Gina demanded proof, the woman still forced her to stay for questioning, her tone dripping with contempt. Gina was overwhelmed with worry. If they searched her and discovered Odell had no disguising magic on her, her daughter's true identity would be exposed. The housekeeper refused to listen to any explanation, snapping at her to be quiet and obey immediately, her attitude utterly overbearing. The servants roughly moved to drag the mother and daughter away, ignoring Gina's weak attempts to resist. Gina clutched her child tightly to her chest, her eyes blazing as she screamed at them not to dare touch her daughter, her maternal instincts flaring fiercely. The housekeeper was stunned, never expecting a lowly commoner to have the audacity to defy her authority so boldly. Gina understood all too well that the servants here were used to bullying those weaker than themselves, relying on their master's power and status. Painful memories came flooding back. She recalled being coldly shunned and isolated even after she had already been exiled from this place. It turned out these very servants had once whispered behind her back, dismissing her as nothing more than a puppet crown princess who would be quietly discarded within a few months without so much as a farewell. They had even mocked her for carrying the reputation of a spy, saying no one respected her, that she was nothing but a thorn in everyone's side. Those bitter words from years past echoed in Gina's ears, reminding her that in the end, she was only ever going to be an eyesore before the Empress. Please review. But the Gina of today was no longer the fragile young lady who once endured being bullied. She had toughened herself far beyond that. Now she had a priceless treasure to protect, so when the housekeeper moved to call for more people, Gina was already bristling, ready to fight back to the end. She warned the housekeeper to think very carefully before calling anyone else over. Gina seized on the excuse that the head steward had personally asked her to make a sachet for some high-ranking figure. She threatened that she would never make another sachet again if the servants kept deliberately making trouble by demanding to search her guests' belongings. The housekeeper broke out in a cold sweat, sensing the noble bearing radiating from this supposed commoner, and began to back down. Gina declared firmly that she would be leaving now, while the woman stood there still frozen in place. Gina hurried to carry her child into the carriage, silently thanking whoever had rescued her and guessing that some important figure in the palace must be in urgent need of a sachet. In the carriage, the child looked up with wide, worried eyes and called for her mother, sensing the unease radiating from the adults around her. Gina held her daughter close, comforting her, promising that everything was fine now and that they would head straight home together, trying her best to stay calm. Just then, Cecil appeared coldly, blocking the front of the carriage, his sharp gaze freezing the very air around them. Gina asked about the perfumer's whereabouts, while the housekeeper reported back that the woman had a child who looked exactly like the young master. Cecil glanced suspiciously at the closed carriage window, some instinct telling him something was off. Gina held her breath, peering through the crack of the door, her heart clenching as she saw Cecil, still as handsome as the day they first met, 5 long years of separation notwithstanding. Her heart pounded wildly in her chest, and she couldn't tell whether it was from stirring feelings for her former love or from the overwhelming terror gripping her mind. The guards relayed that the prince wished to speak with her and demanded she step out of the carriage at once, the stern command making Gina shudder with fear. She told herself firmly that she was now just an ordinary commoner mother, not a crown princess anymore, and that she had to be strong to protect the secret about Odell. Gina stepped down but kept her head bowed low, murmuring an apology for being unable to greet him properly, hiding how badly she was trembling. She invented a story about her child having a severe pollen allergy needing urgent care, hoping to get Cecil to let them pass, but he insisted she show herself properly. Cecil ordered the guards to pull her out, his voice cold as ice, refusing to accept any more excuses or refusals. In despair, Gina clutched her child close, closing her eyes, bracing herself for the worst that was about to happen. Luckily, a soldier's shout rang out announcing that the young master had been found elsewhere, instantly scattering everyone's attention. Cecil froze, his gaze wavering violently at the news about his missing son. He decided to turn and go search for his child, letting the suspicious carriage go free, since his son's safety mattered more than anything else. Gina recounted how, over the years, she had lived in hiding on the outskirts, selling perfume to survive while quietly gathering information about her lost child. By chance, she had met a generous customer, and ironically, that person turned out to be none other than the steward from her ex-husband's palace. In the carriage, Gina urged the coachman to hurry, terrified that Cecil might change his mind and come after them if he discovered this shocking truth. The carriage rolled off in haste. Gina knew she had to leave this place entirely and find another, safer way to continue searching for her other child. The child in her lap innocently asked if her mother was okay, seeing how tense she looked, her bright eyes full of worry. Gina forced a smile to reassure her, hiding the anxiety churning in her stomach so her daughter wouldn't be frightened too. Looking at the small child in her arms, all her lingering worries seemed to melt away, leaving only boundless love behind. Suddenly, Gina noticed, to her surprise, that her daughter seemed to have grown a little taller. She felt a flicker of doubt but wasn't yet sure. Little Theodore, still disguised as Odell, quickly changed the subject, loudly complaining of hunger to divert his mother's attention. Once home, the boy's eyes lit up at the sight of the pile of pastries, and he asked shyly if he could really eat them, since back at the palace he had always been forbidden from so many things. Gina smiled happily, letting him eat as much as he liked, wanting to make up for everything he'd been denied. Overjoyed, the boy rattled off every treat he'd been craving: apple pie, chocolate cake, strawberry jelly, things he'd only ever dared to dream about. Theodore silently wished that his own birth mother could be just as gentle and understanding as this mother was. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Cecil stood before Odell, disguised as Theodore, after the child had been found and brought back. Cecil looked coldly at his son with a sharp, scrutinizing gaze, as though still suspicious of something. Odell recalled Theodore telling her that their father was extremely strict and disliked him, and she felt a shiver of fear before his intimidating presence. The steward reminded them it was time for lessons, and Cecil was about to turn and head off to his own work. Determined to help Theodore mend his relationship with their father, Odell mustered every ounce of courage to make a bold move. She ran up and clutched tightly at the hem of Cecil's coat, calling out, "Father," in the sweetest, most affectionate tone anyone had ever heard from him. To everyone's shock, Odell asked Cecil to take a walk in the garden with her, her eyes shining with hopeful anticipation. A servant broke into a cold sweat, thinking to himself that the young master had guts of steel today. Acting so clingy like a little puppy was sure to get him scolded. The other servants trembled, certain the prince would erupt in fury at being disturbed in the middle of his busy schedule. But against everyone's expectations, Cecil simply replied with a short, "Fine," leaving everyone frozen in shock. Every single person there gaped in astonishment, unable to believe their own eyes at this rare display of leniency from the famously cold-hearted prince. Odell walked cheerfully beside her icy father, while the servants were still reeling from this unbelievable turn of events. But once they sat down for tea, a terrifying silence settled over them, and Odell began to regret letting the request for a walk slip out. Cecil radiated an ice-cold aura that seemed to freeze the very air around them, leaving the little girl shivering. Odell was scared out of her wits, unsure how to get closer to this terrifying father and break through the wall of ice separating them. Cecil suddenly asked why she wasn't eating, or if the cake simply wasn't to her liking. The maid immediately dropped to her knees, apologizing frantically, ready to remake it at once for fear of harsh punishment. Odell quickly stepped in to defend the maid, stuffing her mouth eagerly with cake to prove it was delicious, hoping to keep her father from getting angry. Watching the child eat messily, cream smeared all over her face, Cecil studied her closely, never taking his eyes off her. Suddenly, he gave a faint smirk, a rare smile that left Odell wondering, baffled, whether she had just imagined it. The smile vanished so quickly that the girl thought her eyes had simply been playing tricks on her out of sheer nervousness. Odell decided to try one final trick, hopping off her chair and running over to close the distance with her father. She grabbed hold of Cecil's large gloved hand and called out to him tenderly. Odell held out a small flower she had picked from the garden, praising how nice her father looked when he smiled and offering it to him as a keepsake. Cecil looked at the flower, then at his child, his expression flickering with something complicated at the innocent, sincere compliment. He harshly refused, telling her he had no need for gentleness or softness, that such things were only for women to like. Odell felt hurt, thinking to herself that Theodore clearly loved flowers, and yet their father had the heart to reject it so cruelly and coldly. Suddenly, Cecil placed a hand on her head, remarking with confusion that his son seemed to have gotten a bit shorter, making Odell's heart lurch in fear of being exposed. He told her he would measure her height again next time and reminded her to eat properly, then walked off coldly. Back at Gina's house, Theodore finished his plate of cakes clean and thanked his mother politely, while Gina lovingly wiped his mouth with tender care. Gina thought back on the years she had spent secretly selling sachets, hiding her noble identity to avoid drawing anyone's attention. Thanks to her old friend Irina's help, she received an invitation to a perfume tasting event, an opportunity to earn money to help her and her child escape far away. Seeing his mother getting ready to leave, Theodore looked up with innocent eyes and asked if she was going to work. Gina held his hand, hesitated for a moment, then nodded, reassuring the boy that everything would be fine. Understanding, the boy grinned brightly and promised to stay home and behave, absolutely refusing to open the door for strangers so his mother could go about her business without worry. Theodore reminded himself that Odell had told him their mother was very busy, so he had to be well-behaved and not cause her any trouble. Gina kissed her son goodbye on the cheek before setting off for the important event, carrying with her a great deal of hope for a better life. At the event, the noble ladies buzzed with curiosity about who had created tonight's remarkable new perfume, curiosity filling the entire hall. Gina appeared in a stunning blue gown with a mysterious half-mask covering her face, drawing every eye in the room. She personally poured the perfume into a tower of glasses, its unique scent instantly captivating everyone present. The curious crowd speculated wildly. Some guessed she must be a noblewoman hiding her identity. Others sneered that she was probably just an ugly country girl too ashamed to show her face. A red-haired noblewoman laughed disdainfully and loudly demanded she remove her mask to prove whether she was truly worthy of noble status. Gina calmly replied, openly admitting that she came from a small town and had no noble lineage to speak of. The red-haired woman, with a sharp, cutting gaze, sneered that it was precisely because of the maker's lowly origins that the perfume gave off such a cheap scent. Unshaken, Gina replied evenly that the true measure of a scent's worth wasn't its expensive ingredients, but its ability to touch the heart of whoever experienced it. She declared that her purpose was to use fragrance to heal wounded souls, and pointedly implied that it was, in fact, uncultured behavior that truly made a person cheap. The crowd around them began to whisper, realizing that the troublemaker was none other than Lady Lilia of the Earl's family, notorious for her obsessive, one-sided love and controlling nature toward the crown prince. Humiliated by having some country nobody lecture her in front of everyone, Lilia flew into a rage, shrieking, "Who do you think I am?" and swung her hand to deliver a thunderous slap across Gina's face. But before that vicious hand could land, it was caught mid-air by another firmer hand. Lilia was horrified to realize the one who had seized her wrist was none other than Crown Prince Cecil. The prince's sudden appearance sent shockwaves through the entire hall, while Gina stood rooted to the spot, her heart pounding wildly in her chest at the sight of her ex-husband standing right in front of her. Cecil shot Lilia a chillingly cold look, demanding to know by what right she dared question his personal comings and goings, leaving her trembling and stammering excuses. Unwilling to waste any more words on such an arrogant woman, his gaze turning as sharp as a blade, Cecil delivered one short but crushing line, ordering Lilia to vanish from his sight immediately. Lilia fled so fast she practically left her shoes behind, leaving Gina standing there in a cold sweat. She silently lamented her rotten luck. She'd only just escaped him that morning, and now here she was, running into him again in this ironic twist of a situation. Cecil slowly stepped closer, gently taking the perfume bottle that had caused the whole altercation, studying the object in his hand with careful attention. He turned to look at the mysterious masked woman, remarking with pointed meaning that the perfume she had created carried an extraordinarily distinctive scent, as though it stirred something in him. Gina panicked completely, her pupils dilating behind the mask, her mind fixed on a single thought. She had to find a way to slip away before he discovered her true identity. But before she could even take a step, Cecil's warm, low voice rang out, holding her in place. He expressed his wish to buy the perfume bottle, unwittingly trapping Gina in an impossible dilemma with no way out. Cecil asked the woman before him whether his intense, overbearing presence was frightening her. Gina trembled with worry beneath her veil as Cecil, sounding uncertain, asked if it seemed like they had perhaps met somewhere before. She hastily bowed her head and denied it, claiming she was merely a lowly commoner who had been startled and behaved improperly under the prince's overwhelming presence. Gina firmly refused to sell the perfume bottle to Cecil, her hand trembling from the tension of facing her ex-husband directly. Cecil refused to accept such an unreasonable refusal, pressing closer and demanding to know exactly why she was so adamant about not selling him the product. Backed into a corner, Gina desperately challenged him. If he could guess the most important floral ingredient in it, she would sell it to him, hoping this demand would make him give up. She was certain that even if he guessed correctly, she would simply find another excuse to refuse, determined not to let the bottle fall into his hands. Cecil replied, his sharp gaze seeming to see straight through her as he prepared to answer the challenge. He casually uttered a single name, South African Orchid, and Gina froze in shock, her pupils dilating in astonishment that he still remembered that particular scent, a scent tied to a precious memory. Memories rushed back to that cold political marriage, a time when the two of them had only shared a bed on their wedding night before living apart like complete strangers. However, Gina suddenly recalled the one exception, a rare, fleeting moment when the two of them had grown close, breaking through their usual cold distance. Back then, Gina had been happily harvesting flowers in the garden to make a sachet, wondering to herself whether this small gift would please him. Cecil had suddenly appeared from behind, asking what she was doing, making Gina jump in fright. Flustered, she hid the sachet like a child caught doing something wrong, stammering a greeting to the prince, surprised she hadn't heard his footsteps at all. As she stumbled off balance, a firm hand reached out to steady her. Noticing his wife's suspiciously flustered behavior, Cecil curiously stepped closer and pressed her for the reason she was out here. She told him she was preparing a special gift. Proudly, she held out her basket of flowers, showing off her achievement, flowers she had grown and tended herself, now blooming so vibrantly. He stared at her, dumbfounded, while she scolded herself inwardly for rambling on about things that had nothing to do with him, caught up in her fluster. He suddenly noticed her hand was scraped and bleeding slightly, and asked with concern, but she only laughed it off, insisting it was nothing. Without a word, he gently used magic to heal the wound on her hand, a soft glow radiating from his fingers as it soothed away the pain. He kindly told her not to do such rough physical labor meant for servants, his concern making Cecil himself blush with embarrassment. Once done, Cecil told her to go rest in her room, his gaze lingering on her retreating figure, full of unspoken emotion and longing. Suddenly, a violent wave of pain from the curse struck him. Cecil clutched his chest and collapsed, his face twisting in unbearable agony. Hearing the strange commotion, Gina spun around in alarm, crying out his name as she saw her husband collapse to the ground. She rushed to catch him, and Cecil, his voice weak, asked her to take him to a private room at once, insisting no one must find out. Night fell, the room sinking into darkness and tense silence as Cecil struggled against the pain. Gina anxiously asked where it hurt, her trembling hand touching him with deep concern and sympathy. Cecil warned her of the consequences if word of his condition ever reached her father, forcing her to keep it an absolute secret. Gina swore on her honor that she would never breathe a word of it, insisting that her only wish was to serve and protect His Highness. The excruciating headache tormented Cecil relentlessly. Gina stood beside him, deeply worried, trying to find some way to help. She suddenly remembered that the South African orchid was the most effective remedy for headaches that she knew of. Gina explained that the flower's fragrance had powerful calming and pain-relieving properties that could help ease his suffering. In his delirium, Cecil murmured that if only she weren't a daughter of the Eel family, he would never fall in love with her. Watching him drift off to sleep, she softly called his name, her heart heavy with feelings she could never voice aloud. Half asleep, Cecil took her hand and complimented the red birthmark on it, calling it beautiful, making Gina blush, her heart pounding. She silently confessed to herself that her heart had belonged to him completely ever since the day he saved her by the banks of the Namco River, when she was 12 years old. Recalling his promise never to hurt her, Gina embraced her sleeping husband, quietly accepting her one-sided love in silence. The next morning, Cecil woke to find himself alone, a sachet in his hand, and was struck with surprise by the note left behind. Reading Gina's thoughtful, caring words, Cecil felt a stirring of emotion, the image of his gentle wife rising up in his mind. Back in the present, Gina looked at a lost-in-thought Cecil, aching inside as she wondered whether he was still tormented by those terrible headaches. She clenched her fists tightly, silently warning herself not to let her feelings stir, not to repeat the painful mistakes of the past. Cecil suggested she return to the estate to teach him how to make this perfume. Gina, wary, refused, telling herself to stay calm and handle this carefully. She hastily excused herself, claiming poor health, wanting to escape this dangerous situation before she was exposed. Before she could take a single step, a firm hand seized her wrist, stopping her attempt to flee. Cecil coldly declared that if she didn't cooperate, he would resort to force to make her come with him. Terrified, Gina struggled, begging the prince to let her go, but his grip held firm as an iron vice. Cecil froze upon spotting the red birthmark on her wrist, a unique, unmistakable mark. Memories crashed together with the present, and he realized, stunned, that the masked woman before him was, in fact, his own wife. He gasped out the name Gina in utter disbelief, his eyes locking onto her as though he couldn't trust what he was seeing. The sound of a third person's footsteps cut through the tense moment, shattering the suffocating atmosphere. Case appeared with a scornful smirk, mocking the prince for lingering with a mere commoner. Cecil scowled with irritation at the uninvited intruder, while Gina was overcome with panic upon recognizing her own brother. Case arrogantly boasted about his family's power, mocking Cecil for discarding his sister only to now pathetically flirt with some country girl. He brought up how, 5 years earlier, Gina had been cast aside after only a few months, using it to provoke Cecil, treating it as justification to consider Cecil his enemy. Case continued hurling insults at Gina, calling her scrawny and frail, offering fake sympathy for his sister's sacrifice. At the word sacrifice, Cecil's expression darkened, a terrifying blaze of fury and hatred igniting in his eyes. He sharply exposed the truth, that it was the Eel family itself, the cold-blooded ones, who had pushed Gina toward death, sending her right into the enemy's hands. Gina stood between the two men, gripping her dress tightly, trembling with pain and resentment as her painful past was dredged up again. Memories of her domineering father resurfaced, how he had forced her after the marriage to report on her husband's every move to serve the family. He had compared Cecil to the second prince, plotting to overthrow Cecil and place his own faction's man on the throne. Her father had crammed her head full of lies, insisting Cecil was a bad omen and that the second prince was the rightful heir. Their ultimate goal was only to preserve the Eel family's absolute power, with no regard whatsoever for her feelings or happiness. Case had joined their father in treating her like nothing more than a commodity, meant to be married off to someone else the moment she finished her job as a spy. He threatened and manipulated her with sweet, hollow words, insisting that as long as he was around, she had nothing to fear. But Gina had only ever wanted to marry Cecil. She would rather die than want anyone other than him. To her father and brother, she was nothing but an unfeeling puppet, a pawn for them to manipulate in their brutal game of power. Seizing the chaotic moment, Gina stomped hard on Cecil's foot to break free, determined not to repeat her past mistake of being trapped once again. Despite the pain, Cecil helplessly called after Gina as her familiar figure vanished from sight. Cecil turned to warn Case to get out of his way if he didn't want to bring disaster upon himself, his eyes blazing with menace. He walked off in contempt, leaving Case standing there fuming, seething at being so openly scorned by the prince. A henchman reported to Case that the second prince had summoned him and that Cecil's illness was worsening exactly as planned. Case flashed a scheming smile, thoroughly pleased that everything was unfolding precisely according to their dark plan. A servant, fearful, asked Cecil what he needed as he stood there in silence, his expression terrifying. Cecil ordered the guards to capture that woman no matter what, swearing he would never let her slip away again. In a remote village on the outskirts of the city, Gina knocked on her old friend Irina's door in the dead of night, looking utterly worn and disheveled. Concerned, Irina asked how business had been going, but Gina sadly admitted she urgently needed money to travel. In a panic, Gina explained that Cecil might have recognized her and that she needed to flee immediately before she was caught again. Thinking quickly, Irina suggested she disguise herself and blend in with her herb-gathering caravan, which was set to depart for another country in 3 days. Overjoyed, Gina squeezed her friend's hand, thanking her repeatedly for saving her and her daughter from certain disaster. Still, Irina worried about the long, treacherous road ahead, unsure how Gina would manage alone with her child. Gina gritted her teeth, her eyes resolute despite the pain, saying she had no choice but to take that path, even though it was the last thing she wanted. Back at the palace, Odell, still disguised as Theodore, squealed with delight when the burden flew in carrying a letter from the real Theodore. The girl happily read Theodore's letter about life outside the palace, sighing in relief that their father hadn't discovered the swap. Reading the part where Theodore praised how gentle their mother was, Odell felt a pang of longing, wishing she too had a loving mother like that by her side. The girl hatched a bold idea to bring their parents together, so both siblings could finally have a complete family. Odell daydreamed about her parents sharing a warm kiss and the whole family reuniting happily together. In his letter, Theodore proposed meeting his sister at Moon Lake in 2 days to swap their identities back. Gina returned home and hurriedly informed Theodore, still disguised as Odell, that they would soon have to move to another country due to the urgent danger they were in. The boy was struck with terror, the blood draining from his face, since he had just arranged to meet his sister for the swap back and now feared being trapped as a girl forever. Gina reassured him, saying that before they left, she wanted to take him somewhere special to settle one last piece of unfinished business. Back at the palace, the trembling guards knelt and reported that they had lost track of Gina in the chaotic crowd. Cecil flew into a rage, shouting furiously and ordering every corner searched, determined to find that woman no matter the cost. Odell hid behind a door, terrified at the sight of her father raging like a tiger, intending to quietly slip away before she got caught in the crossfire. But unluckily for her, Cecil's sharp instincts caught sight of her, and he called out sharply for Theodore, making the girl's heart stop. Startled by the stern call, the girl tripped and fell flat on the floor, aching all over. Odell pouted, thinking to herself that her brother would surely be upset since she'd let slip that their father was already gone, while Cecil lifted her up into his arms. "Please review." The girl kept whining, saying that since tomorrow the two of them wouldn't get to see each other all day, they absolutely had to do something together right now. Odell looked up at her father with wide, sparkling eyes, boldly inviting Cecil to sneak away from his duties the night after next to go out with her to Moon Lake. Curious, Cecil asked why Moon Lake, of all places, at night. Odell bashfully explained she'd heard there were fireflies there and really wanted to see them. Charmed by his son's adorableness, Cecil eventually nodded in agreement, making the girl squeal with joy. Odell happily sealed the promise with her father, just as a servant arrived to remind the young master it was time for bed. The girl reminded her father not to break his promise, since lying was a bad thing, then cheerfully waved goodnight to him. Watching his son skip away, Cecil narrowed his eyes suspiciously, sensing that something here was quite off. He had noticed that lately his child had become unusually lively and no longer seemed afraid of him the way he used to, a complete departure from his usual behavior. Cecil bent down to pick up a teddy bear, telling himself that perhaps his son had simply grown up and felt lonely, wandering this vast estate all alone. With the mindset of a mighty warrior, he seriously considered going out to hunt down a real, full-grown bear to keep his son company. The servant broke out in a cold sweat, not daring to explain that children usually preferred toy bears, not real, ferocious ones, and reluctantly agreed to carry out his master's wishes. In a back alley, rumors spread among eavesdroppers that the crime boss Aaron was desperately searching for a healer. The guards blocking the road looked at the disguised Gina with contempt, chasing her off, insisting she showed no sign whatsoever of being someone who could use magic. Still in disguise, Gina calmly countered, playing her trump card, claiming she knew someone with the rare ability to perform purification magic. The guards began to waver, murmuring among themselves about whether her claim could possibly be true, since purification magic was so rare that even the royal family had been desperately searching for it. Their attitude flipped instantly. They invited her in for tea while she waited, though Gina shrewdly noticed that these guards belonged to the Seas family. Sensing something was off, Gina excused herself, claiming urgent business, quickly leaving behind a note with her contact number for crime boss Aaron before slipping away. Aaron Odyssey, the fiery-haired black market boss, appeared holding the note, listening to his subordinates' report on the situation. The following night at Moon Lake, Cecil arrived at the meeting spot but found no sign of his son. Instead, a timid servant handed him a letter the young master had left behind. In the letter, the boy invited his father to play hide-and-seek, with the rule that he had to find him within 20 minutes and absolutely no cheating, complete with an adorable little drawing. Helpless against his son's mischief, Cecil ordered the servant to stay put while he went to search for his precious child himself. He ventured alone deep into the dense forest surrounding Moon Lake, where a thick fog was beginning to settle. Meanwhile, Gina too was desperately searching for Odell amid the thick fog, her heart burning with worry. Just a moment ago, the excited child had asked her mother to play hide-and-seek and then dashed off, leaving Gina calling frantically after her. As Gina groped her way through the fog, she suddenly spotted a pair of unfamiliar legs standing before her. Cecil, taken aback, called out his son's name while Gina grew anxious. The figure before her was far too tall, and the fog obscured his face so she couldn't make it out clearly. Cecil politely apologized for being so absorbed in searching for his child that he hadn't watched where he was going, and kindly asked the strange woman if she was all right. Hidden in the bushes, the twin siblings watched, giggling, marveling at how perfect their parents looked together, and surprised to see their father acting so gentle. Excited, Odell decided to launch one final push to help nudge her parents closer together. Suddenly, thousands of fireflies lit up the forest, creating a shimmering, magical scene that left Cecil awestruck. Gina removed her hood, her eyes sparkling as they reflected the shimmering, magical light, and she couldn't help but praise the beauty of the tiny glowing lights. Cecil turned to make conversation, asking if she too was searching for a lost child. Gina nodded, confirming that she and her daughter were playing hide-and-seek, which made Cecil think to himself that this family's child must be just as mischievous as his own son. They began to open up, sharing stories about their children's antics, catching bugs, fishing, climbing trees for fruit, lamenting that the moment they let their guard down, the kids got themselves into trouble. When Cecil asked whether raising a child was exhausting, Gina smiled and replied that although it was tiring, patient observation always revealed what was really going on in a child's heart. She happily shared that simply seeing her child happy and adorable made all the exhaustion melt away, and that every sacrifice felt entirely worth it. Cecil looked at the woman before him with a gentle, understanding gaze, while nearby, Theodore, hidden and listening, was moved to hear his father admit such a thing. Gina accidentally stumbled, and Cecil quickly caught her. Both of them apologized awkwardly, standing close together in the moment. He kindly handed her a branch to use as support, advising her to hold on to it for easier footing in the dark forest. Gina murmured her thanks, quietly thinking to herself that despite this man's cold exterior, he was, deep down, incredibly warm and kind. Cecil grew curious about the child's father. Gina's expression flickered with sadness at the mention of her personal circumstances, but she remained resolute, insisting she would give her child all the love she could, even alone. The stranger's resilience struck Cecil deeply, her image overlapping in his mind with the memory of his fierce, strong-willed ex-wife. He recalled the image of a delicate young noblewoman, undeterred by hardship, working with her own hands under the blazing sun. Her nimble hands, deftly turning the soil back then, had contrasted so starkly with her fragile, delicate appearance that he simply couldn't look away. She used to whisper to the flowers, hoping they would bloom quickly so she could make perfume for her husband, believing perfume would be better than a simple sachet. Hearing her wish that she could sleep peacefully every night, Cecil's heart had stirred back then, and he had wondered whether all that care had truly been meant for him. His heart raced, and for the very first time, a selfish desire began to take root. The wish to keep that woman by his side forever. But reason quickly stamped out the thought, leaving him to scold himself for entertaining such far-fetched fantasies. Back in the present, Cecil realized with bitter sorrow that perhaps he had loved Gina since that very time, but now it was all just a thing of the past, since she was no longer with him. Seeing him fall silent, staring at her, Gina worried she had said something inappropriate. Gina scolded herself for pouring out her heart to a stranger, while Cecil quickly waved his hands, explaining that he was simply in awe of her kindness and resilience. Wistfully, he admitted that she reminded him of someone from his past, and expressed hope of hearing more of her parenting experiences if they ever met again. Gina politely agreed. In the bushes, the two children cheered with delight, thrilled that their plan to bring their parents together had succeeded splendidly, and by then they had also managed to swap their clothes back. The little bird chirped happily as the two siblings shared a reluctant goodbye, Theodore firmly promising to sneak out again to visit his sister and mother. The boy affirmed their unbreakable bond, reassuring his sister not to worry, since he would find a way to sneak out and visit often. With everything settled, Odell called out for her mother, urging Gina to hurry over so they could leave. Gina rushed after her daughter, warning her not to run too fast or she'd fall, only to trip herself instead. Cecil shouted a warning, seeing the woman about to fall into danger. In the moment she stumbled, Gina's hood slipped off, revealing her true hair, and once again Cecil caught her just in time. He anxiously asked if she was hurt. Gina murmured that she was fine, but the moment had brought them closer together than ever before. Cecil was stunned to feel his heart racing wildly, with no trace of the usual aversion he expected when touching this woman. Gina unconsciously whispered his name, half in disbelief, not daring to believe it. She quickly pushed the thought away, telling herself not to fantasize, steeling herself with the reminder that tomorrow she would leave this place forever. Just then the guards rushed in, gaping in shock at the sight of the prince embracing a strange woman. Cecil released her and turned to face his subordinates, who had all dropped to their knees in greeting. He coldly asked if the young master had been found yet. The trembling guards reported there was still no sign of him. By now, Gina was absolutely certain that this man was Cecil, and she scrambled to find a way to escape before the fog cleared and revealed her face completely. He ordered the soldiers to widen the search, telling them to help find this woman's child as well. A soldier hesitated, glancing at Gina with suspicion, seemingly about to ask something more. His gaze accidentally fell on the Royal Toronto crest lying on the ground, the precious token he had once given Gina on their wedding day. Holding the crest, still faintly scented with a familiar floral fragrance, Cecil pieced the clues together, remembering that only one outlying village grew that particular flower. He immediately ordered the entire village sealed off, forbidding anyone from entering or leaving. Soldiers swarmed to surround Gina's village, but Cecil ordered them all to stand down while he went in alone. Stepping into the modest little house, Cecil felt a pang of sorrow, wondering if his wife had truly been living in such hardship all these years. A familiar scent lingered faintly in the room, confirming his suspicion, a scent that had always brought him a sense of peace. Looking at the research tools scattered about, he remembered his studious wife, someone who had never cared for the extravagant, frivolous parties of noble society. He felt a pang of grief realizing she had severed all ties with the Eel family to live independently, making perfume for a living, a life that must have been terribly hard. Suddenly his eyes fell upon a child's toy and his pupils contracted in shock. The door swung open, and Cecil stood stunned at the sight of Gina clutching her little daughter tightly, both of them cowering in fear. Gina cried out in despair, unable to understand how he had found this place, while Odell stared in confusion, calling for her mother. Cecil coldly announced that the village was surrounded, extinguishing every last hope of escape for mother and daughter. He tried to reassure her that he only wanted to talk, but Gina bristled like a cornered animal, accusing him of coming here to snoop around and harm Odell. When Cecil asked about the child, Gina cut him off sharply, shouting that the girl was hers alone and had nothing to do with him. Cecil stood there in silence, his eyes betraying visible hurt at his wife's fierce resistance. Odell's eyes went wide with innocent confusion, wondering why Theodore's father had suddenly appeared here. Gina forced herself to stay calm, telling her daughter to go back to her room so the adults could talk. Odell obediently complied. The room fell into silence, and Cecil finally spoke, asking if she had been well over the past years. Gina coldly replied that she was fine and would be leaving the next day, then turned to walk away as if he had nothing else to say. Cecil hurriedly grabbed her, confessing that he had spent all this time searching for her, hoping their whole family could finally be reunited. He earnestly told her that Theodore was waiting for her and that he himself had always longed to see her again. But Gina bitterly reminded him of her status as an enemy and her past as a spy, certain that sooner or later he would come to doubt her all over again, just as before. Cecil begged her to return to the palace, confessing his past mistakes, but Gina brushed him off, insisting she had no need for his pity. She declared that she was living just fine, free and answerable to no one, and coldly proclaimed that whatever feelings she once had for him had long since died. His words cut through Cecil like a knife to the heart, leaving him utterly frozen, his face etched with unbearable pain. In desperation, he ran after her and wrapped her in his arms from behind, swearing to protect her and accept even her child from another man, no matter who the father was. Stunned by such reckless, all-consuming devotion, Gina cried out for him to come to his senses. Deep down, Gina was terrified that if Odell's true identity were ever exposed, her ruthless birth father would surely turn the child into a pawn to blackmail Cecil. She told herself she could not let her family be dragged into the royal power struggle ever again. She could not bear to endure the pain of losing a child a second time. Gina firmly rejected his plea, declaring resolutely that she would never return to that place of suffering. She coldly reminded Cecil that it was he who had chosen to end their marriage back then, and insisted their relationship was completely over. Cecil refused to accept this harsh truth, still clinging desperately, stammering his denial, insisting that their shared child remained an unbreakable bond between them. Just then, Irina rushed over, cutting them off, utterly astonished to find the noble prince here of all places. Her friend immediately stepped in to shield Gina, driving Cecil off, though he still stubbornly insisted on bringing Gina home with him. In the face of Cecil's stubborn resolve, Irina didn't hesitate to threaten to alert the whole village that the crown prince of the realm was trying to use force to abduct a defenseless commoner woman. She furiously scolded Cecil for once cruelly accusing Gina of being a spy and casting her out without mercy, only to shamelessly return now with hollow words of love, utterly oblivious to how hard Gina's life had been these past years. Irina looked the powerful prince straight in the eye and declared sternly that he had lost every right to interfere with or trample over Gina's life ever again. Undeterred by the resistance, Cecil still gripped Gina's hand tightly, pleading with her to come to the estate with him tonight and promising they would set out together the next morning, but Gina remained resolutely opposed. With no other option left, Cecil humbled himself, begging her for just 3 months, bitterly comparing himself to a condemned prisoner who, even before death, was granted one last chance to plead his case. He looked at her with anguished, pleading eyes, confessing that he couldn't bear the thought of her disappearing from his life, never to be seen again. Cecil made one final vow, swearing on his honor that after those 3 short months, if her feelings still hadn't changed, he would respect her decision and never force her to stay. Hidden nearby, Odell overheard the entire conversation, stunned as she pieced together the truth, that Theodore's father hadn't merely known her mother, but had actually been deeply in love with her for all these years. The girl silently cheered and sighed. This meant she would get to see her brother Theodore again in 3 months. Odell clenched her fists with determination, resolving to use this chance to help clear up every misunderstanding from the past. Back at the palace, the servants whispered among themselves about how the prince had finally returned late at night, but in an absolutely terrible mood. They murmured that he seemed to have changed entirely after getting involved with some country woman, then quickly hushed each other for fear of punishment. In the dark room, Cecil sat lost in thought, his expression cold, seemingly weighing something extremely complicated. His assistant watched anxiously as Cecil pored over documents with an irritable air since early morning, thinking to himself that the prince hadn't slept a wink since returning yesterday, so it was best to tread carefully and avoid provoking him. Cecil suddenly asked offhandedly what one should do if their wife was upset with them, then quickly stammered a correction, claiming it was actually about a friend struggling to make amends. The sharp-eyed assistant instantly realized that friend was Cecil himself, and teasingly asked if it had anything to do with the woman from the perfume tasting event. He suggested that noble ladies in the capital these days loved jewelry, so a gift might be a good idea. Cecil dismissed the idea at once, insisting this woman was nothing like other noble women. She couldn't care less about gold or jewels. With a serious yet slightly bashful expression, Cecil revealed one more important detail, that she already had a child, leaving his assistant so shocked his jaw dropped, never expecting the prince to have such unusual taste. Once he recovered, the assistant quickly suggested visiting a toy shop instead, since a gift that delighted the child was sure to make the mother happy too. Cecil immediately ordered his assistant to go to the finest toy shop in the city and buy everything a little girl could possibly want. Not only that, he also demanded a selection of precious pearls and rare treasures from last year's tribute stored in the treasury. Cecil instructed that everything be sent to Irina's clinic, leaving the assistant utterly stunned once again upon learning that the woman who had caught the prince's attention was actually a doctor. Ignoring his subordinate's astonishment, Cecil urged him to carry out the order immediately, leaving the assistant scrambling to comply. Elsewhere in the estate, a servant reported that young Master Theodore had been unusually gloomy ever since returning from the lake, spending most of his free time cooped up in his room instead of studying. Cecil entered his son's room. Theodore jumped in alarm at the sight of his father and stammered out a greeting. Theodore stood stiffly, frightened, his heart pounding at Cecil's overwhelming, authoritative presence. Looking at his son, Cecil's expression softened, and he gently told him that since there was no one else around, Theodore could simply call him Papa. Watching his child, Cecil thought to himself that for Theodore's safety, he could not let the boy's true identity be known, and so had disguised him as a distant nephew instead. It was precisely this isolation, years of never being allowed outside, that had made Theodore so shy and withdrawn. Cecil pondered, telling himself that perhaps a child truly did need the care and warmth of a mother. Theodore grew anxious, worried that his father had checked his schoolwork and discovered he had been secretly sending letters to Odell at the inn. Theodore held his head in confusion, wondering if his plan with Odell had failed or if his father had already grown fond of someone else entirely. Cecil had noticed Theodore's flustered, reddened face, but chose to say nothing, simply observing in silence. Cecil told himself he shouldn't use the child as an excuse to bring the woman of his dreams back to the palace just yet. He decided he would tell her about Theodore later, once her feelings had changed. Meanwhile, Theodore, his expression full of resolve, hurriedly thought that he needed to write to Odell right away. At the clinic, little pink-haired Odell squealed with delight at the mountain of gifts, asking if her mother had bought them, while her mother looked at the pile and had a vague guess as to who had really sent them. Irina called out after the mother, while the little girl remained absorbed in happily hugging her enormous new teddy bear. Irina assured her she would send the gifts back later, letting the child play with them a bit first, then confirmed her decision to stay. She noticed Cecil's demeanor was completely different from 5 years ago, but reminded herself she would definitely leave in 3 months. Her only purpose in staying was to find her lost child. Irina handed her a letter that had arrived just the day before. Both of them anxiously opened it together, hoping it held some clue about the child that the man named Aaron was holding. The letter was from Aaron Odyssey, a name that made the other woman gasp in surprise. Aaron was known as the city's notorious information broker, rumored to take on any job, from trading secrets to assassination, robbery, and poisoning. He was a powerful figure with deep ties to the criminal underworld, and rumors of his family's connections to high society remained an enduring mystery. What worried Irina most was that, aside from herself, almost no one knew Gina was searching for her child. The fact that Aaron had sent this letter proved he already knew the secret, so she warned everyone to be extremely careful around this dangerous man. Still, Irina reassured Gina and the others that everything would be fine, promising not to get too deeply entangled in this affair. The letter stated that Aaron would find her child, on the condition that she cure a young lady at a duke's estate who was suffering from a magical backlash. She clasped her hands together in prayer, understanding that even though Aaron was highly capable, she alone, as a mere apothecary, couldn't protect everyone. She resolved to grow stronger, ready to reveal her true abilities to protect her family at any cost. The scene shifted to the Yael estate. It was the Duchess's birthday, so everyone was dressed in their finest, and the second daughter, Eleanor Yael, made her entrance radiating pure confidence. Eleanor thought to herself that Cecil would surely attend, wondering if he might finally notice her. A servant gently reminded Eleanor that she used to despise Cecil, asking if she'd had a change of heart, since he had once been the sworn enemy of the Yael family. Eleanor smirked and replied that back when her sister married Cecil, he had been nothing but an obscure minor prince, but now he had become the most powerful heir to the throne. She shamelessly declared that Cecil should have married her from the very start, so she was simply reclaiming what was rightfully hers. Eleanor felt confident that it didn't matter that her father and brother backed the second prince. As long as she played sweet, Cecil would listen to her every word. A timid maid relayed a rumor that the prince was supporting a country woman with a child, and had even gifted her all the precious jewelry sent as foreign tribute. Hearing this, Eleanor slammed her hand furiously on the table, rattling the teacups. She glared furiously, demanding the maid repeat what she'd just said, her expression twisted with rage. Back at the clinic, the burden flew in carrying another letter. Little Odell read it and panicked, misunderstanding that Theodore's father was courting another woman. Frantic with worry, she thought this was terrible, and that she had to resolve the misunderstanding immediately. Her mother told her to stay home and behave with Irina, since she had to go to the Duke's estate. After her mother left, the girl remembered the letter mentioned Theodore's father would also be at the Duke's estate, so she hatched a plan to secretly follow her mother and act as her little sidekick. On the surface, the girl smiled brightly and reassured her mother that she would stay home and behave, not going anywhere. Disguised as a servant, the mother arrived at the Duke's estate, telling herself she just needed to treat the young lady quickly and then leave right away, hoping everything would go smoothly. The steward led her to Lady Mary's chambers, saying everything should be fine as long as the prince stayed busy entertaining the other noble ladies. She followed quietly among the line of servants, while out in the bustling banquet hall, everyone chatted merrily. Little Odell hid beneath a table, overwhelmed by the crowd, scanning around for her mother. Suddenly, she spotted a tower of delicious pastries on the table, and her hungry stomach won out, so she decided to sneak a small bite before going to find her mother. In another corner, the nobles buzzed with excitement at the sight of a beautiful woman, asking each other if that was Lady Maria of House Ale. Maria made her entrance in a stunning red gown, prompting a nobleman to exclaim in admiration and eagerly request a dance with her. Meanwhile, Cecil was raising a toast with an elderly nobleman, expressing his honor at their partnership, and the man responded with equal graciousness. Sipping a glass of red wine, her gaze cold and sharp, Eleanor smiled wickedly, thinking to herself how ridiculous it was that anyone would think themselves more deserving of the prince than she was, since that position rightfully belonged to her. Meanwhile, the pink-haired little girl wandered through the extravagant party, her face scrunched up from the overpowering perfume that made her little nose itch, longing to find somewhere fresh to breathe. Distracted by her search for a way out, she accidentally bumped into a noblewoman standing nearby, startling them both. Eleanor shrieked upon seeing her gorgeous gown stained. She glared down at the child with contempt, scolding her, demanding to know where this shabby little brat had come from to cause such a scene. Staring at the wine stain spreading across her precious dress, Eleanor panicked, realizing this had been a birthday gift from her brother the year before, worn for the very first time. Now it was ruined, so she decided to let the other nobles handle the matter for her. The crowd began whispering their condemnation, insisting the child had upset Lady Eleanor and demanding her mother be brought out to apologize, leaving the terrified child curling up in fear, stammering that her mother wasn't there. Seeing the situation working in her favor, Eleanor resorted to a false accusation, pretending to gasp in shock that her precious bracelet, a gift from her brother, had also vanished, even though she insisted she had just been wearing it moments ago. Hearing this, everyone around them immediately turned suspicious eyes on the child, confidently declaring that she couldn't possibly be a noble, but must be some little thief who had snuck in. Overwhelmed with panic, the girl turned and bolted, her only thought to find her mother and be safe again. But before she got far, a large hand roughly seized her small arm, a man's voice booming, demanding she hand over the bracelet immediately. The aggressive man accused the girl of deliberately bumping into Lady Eleanor to steal from her, threatening to hand her over to the guards, while the girl shook her head frantically, denying it through tears. Terrified and helpless, tears streaming down her round little face, the girl could only sob and call for her mother in vain amid the crowd of strangers. Suddenly, a deep, commanding voice rang out, ordering the child released, and everyone froze, turning in shock to see who had spoken. Cecil appeared, radiating overwhelming authority, declaring sternly that this child was his own, not some suspicious petty thief. He gently scooped her up into his arms, tenderly asking if she was hurt, while the crowd around them buzzed with recognition that this was young Master Theodore's father. Cecil turned to Eleanor with a cold gaze, offering to compensate for the ruined dress, leaving her so stunned she couldn't utter a word upon realizing this was the crown prince. Holding the trembling child close, Cecil gently soothed her, calming her down after the terrifying ordeal. Feeling the warmth of the small life in his arms, Cecil found himself wondering, almost without thinking, why he felt such a strange, tender affection for this child, who wasn't even his own by blood. Just then, a respectful attendant presented a box of gleaming jewels to Eleanor as a generous gesture of compensation. Eleanor flushed bright red, stammering in disbelief that Prince Cecil himself would personally offer her compensation, wild fantasies already beginning to take root in her mind. However, Cecil swiftly crushed that fantasy with one sharp question, demanding to know whether she truly intended to make a small child pay for such a trivial matter, leaving Eleanor flustered and scrambling to insist she hadn't meant it that way. Suddenly, the child in Cecil's arms spoke up in his defense, plainly calling him father and pointing straight at Eleanor, accusing her of lying. Cecil's eyes widened in astonishment, staring down at the child who had just called him by that tender name. The girl gasped and clapped a hand over her mouth, realizing she had accidentally used her habitual phrase while still playing the role of Theodore. Meanwhile, in a quiet hallway, Gina, wrapped tightly in her cloak, hurried along, telling herself she needed to leave quickly before the commotion from the party gave her away. Suddenly, she froze at the sight of the scene unfolding in the main hall. She stared in disbelief, wondering why on earth her daughter and Cecil were together, a situation she never could have anticipated. Spotting her mother's familiar figure, the girl squealed with joy, calling out, "Mama!" and reaching her arms out toward her. The girl slipped out of Cecil's arms and rushed straight into her mother's embrace, the two of them holding each other tightly. Eleanor stood behind them, watching the pair with a suspicious, scrutinizing gaze, while Cecil followed close behind. Gina thought to herself how dangerous this situation was, with Eleanor present as well, and knew she had to find a way to hide her face before being recognized. Cecil looked directly at the woman before him and gasped out the name Gina. Eleanor quickly cut in, coyly inviting him to dance to the next song to pull his attention back to her. But Cecil harshly shoved her hand away, coldly warning her not to touch him. Eleanor stood frozen, unable to believe the prince's blunt, humiliating rejection of her. Ignoring Eleanor's embarrassment entirely, Cecil walked away, leaving her behind with wild speculations swirling about the identity of that woman and her connection to the rumors of the country girl. Gritting her teeth in fury, Eleanor ordered her servants to immediately investigate the background of that woman and her child. Just then, the little girl winced in pain, drawing everyone's attention. Cecil handed Gina a small vial, explaining it was medicine prepared by the royal physician and very effective. She accepted it gratefully, subtly hinting that he should return to the party and let her handle the rest herself. But the girl suddenly decided she wasn't about to let Papa leave while Theodore was still around. Pointing to her sore knee, she whined, demanding he blow on it to make it better, while Gina tried to coax her daughter into just bearing with it a little longer. Refusing to give in, the girl insisted it had to be done together, with both her father and mother present. Surprised to see her daughter clinging so affectionately to a stranger, Gina thought to herself that the poor thing must really be in a lot of pain. Cecil smiled and told her he would take care of it. Delighted to get her way, the girl beamed with pure satisfaction. Cecil carefully applied a bandage to her knee, kindly telling her it was a reward for being such a good girl. The girl happily thanked him, and Cecil responded with a rare tenderness of his own. Watching the scene unfold, Gina couldn't help but marvel at the strange, blood-deep bond between the two of them, despite having only just met. Suddenly, Cecil paused, examining the wound more closely, realizing it looked exactly like the injury Theodore had sustained a few days earlier from a fall. Sensing Cecil's growing suspicion, Gina quickly thanked him and asked to excuse herself to take her daughter home right away. But Cecil swiftly blocked her path, claiming that after the earlier commotion he no longer had a dance partner, and asked if she really intended to leave without taking responsibility. Confused, Gina asked what responsibility he meant, utterly baffled. Cecil extended his hand toward her with a meaningful look, telling her that was exactly why she had to dance with him tonight. Gina's face flushed bright red with embarrassment as she softly said his name, her heart racing wildly. Gina hesitated, unsure how to respond to Cecil. In her mind, a man of his standing would never lack for dance partners eager to surround him, so surely her presence wasn't really necessary. She reassured herself that even if Cecil claimed he owed something to someone, there was no real reason he had to choose her specifically as his companion for the evening. But then her little daughter suddenly piped up to remind her mother. The girl recalled that Uncle had helped her before, so now that he was in trouble, the two of them should return the favor. The girl innocently repeated a lesson her own mother had once taught her: that repaying kindness to those who help you matters a great deal, leaving Gina lost in thought. Returning to their conversation, Cecil kindly suggested that if Gina didn't want to reveal her true identity in front of the crowd, she could simply wear a mask again, just like last time. To sweeten the offer further, Cecil mentioned that today the royal kitchen's most renowned chefs were all present, preparing one-of-a-kind desserts, which made the little girl squeal with excitement at the news. Unable to resist the temptation of delicious treats, the girl tugged at her mother's dress, pleading, her eyes shining with eager anticipation to try them. Faced with her daughter's adorable pleading, Gina couldn't refuse. She sighed softly and nodded, agreeing to attend. Gina decided to wear a mask covering half her face, calculating that with this disguise, the woman named Eleanor would never be able to recognize her. Shortly after, Cecil had someone bring out a large box, announcing that it held a formal gown personally prepared for her by the king himself. When the lid was lifted, a magnificent, elegant gown appeared before them, sparkling so brightly it seemed to light up the entire room. The little girl gasped with delight, endlessly praising how impossibly cute and beautiful the dress was. But Gina froze, realizing this was the very same dress she used to wear back when she lived at Cecil's palace. She silently wondered why he had so carefully kept this particular keepsake all this time. As Gina stepped into the banquet hall, whispers immediately rippled through the crowd. Everyone was curious about the mysterious masked woman, whose noble bearing rivaled even the finest ladies present, despite rumors that she was merely a country girl. Witnessing Gina's breathtaking beauty in her formal gown, Cecil couldn't hide his embarrassment, his face flushing slightly the moment their eyes met. Gina stood there, elegant and enigmatic in her flowing purple gown and masked face, radiating a beauty that left onlookers breathless. The male guests around them couldn't stop murmuring their admiration, each one longing for the chance to lead this mysterious beauty in a dance. Before anyone else could seize the opportunity, Cecil swiftly stepped forward, took Gina's hand, and led her out onto the dance floor beneath the dazzling lights. As they politely exchanged pleasantries, Duke Mattel passed by, and Cecil leaned down to whisper a warning to Gina, forbidding her from dancing with any other man and telling her not to do anything unnecessary. Gina calmly responded to his possessiveness, firmly stating that the moment the party ended, she would leave immediately without lingering. Cecil unexpectedly pulled her closer against him, declaring with domineering confidence that tonight, he alone would be her only dance partner. The two of them lost themselves in a romantic waltz, spinning gracefully, becoming the center of attention for the entire hall. From a corner, the little girl watched her mother dancing happily, silently wishing that someone she loved could witness this beautiful moment too. In stark contrast to that romantic atmosphere, Eleanor watched from a distance with eyes burning with jealousy, seething at being cast aside by Cecil in favor of this mysterious stranger, right in front of everyone. Eleanor unleashed her fury on her maid for being useless, unable to uncover the identity of the woman dancing with Cecil. Frightened, the maid explained that the woman's name wasn't on the guest list at all, and slyly suggested she might be scheming something behind Cecil's back. Seizing on that theory, Eleanor immediately began plotting something sinister. She ordered her maid to bribe the palace maids to set a trap, hoping to turn Cecil against his new rival. A short while later, Duke Mattel and his attendant intercepted Cecil and Gina. He demanded Gina come with him to clarify some matters, leaving Cecil anxiously asking what on earth had happened. Duke Mattel coldly demanded Gina present her invitation. Faced with this question, Gina had no choice but to admit she had no such invitation with her. Seizing the opening, the Duke immediately accused her of being the mysterious intruder who had secretly slipped into his daughter's private chambers earlier. Gina flinched, startled. She had thought she'd acted discreetly, never expecting that someone from the Duke's household had witnessed her sneaking into the patient's room. A maid stepped forward as a false witness, falsely claiming she had seen with her own eyes that Gina had poisoned the young lady, causing her to vomit blood. Gina knew full well that it was merely old blood being expelled from the body, but she couldn't explain the medical details without revealing her true identity. In her mind, Gina recalled how, out of sympathy for Lady Mary's frail condition, she had secretly left behind a healing sachet. She seethed with resentment at having her kindness twisted into something vile. As a mother herself, she would never dream of poisoning anyone. Duke Mattel, deeply skeptical, refused to believe her explanation that the item was meant to calm the heart and soothe the nerves. The maid picked up the sachet, feigning suspicion, pretending to search for proof of whether it truly contained medicinal herbs or not. In truth, this entire scheme had been Eleanor's doing all along. 30 minutes earlier, she had discovered Gina's sachet left by Lady Mary's pillow. Eleanor and her conspiring servants had worked together, staging a flawless performance to twist a life-saving sachet into damning evidence. Back at the scene, the maid put on a show of shock, crying out that the young lady had just vomited blood and demanding a doctor immediately examine the sachet for poison. Putting his daughter's safety above all else, Duke Mattel immediately ordered the sachet inspected, playing right into the schemer's hands. The culprit loudly declared the sachet contained deadly Kyochiku pollen. Stunned, Gina denied it firmly, insisting she had never put such poisonous pollen into her medicinal sachets. Convinced that Gina had tried to murder his daughter and was now denying it, Duke Mattel furiously ordered the guards to arrest her at once. At this most critical moment, Cecil stepped forward, spreading his arms to shield Gina, his cold gaze warning anyone against daring to touch his dance partner. Furious, Duke Mattel confronted Cecil, insisting the evidence was undeniable, demanding to know if he truly intended to shatter the alliance between their two families over some woman. Despite the mounting pressure, Cecil remained steadfast in defending Gina. He declared firmly that she would never commit such a vile act and demanded that a royal physician be summoned immediately to re-examine Lady Mary, rather than rushing to unfounded accusations. Cecil's unwavering, protective act stirred Gina's heart deeply. She realized this was the first time he had ever stood by her side, placing his complete trust in her against the tide of public opinion.